advantage out of Bertie, who was very fond of him. And she disapproved very much of Edwina, who she thought was a champagne socialist and rather fast.
On November the 20th, 1947, Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip were married in Westminster Abbey. It was a spectacular wedding which symbolised the end of an era of austerity for the nation and prompted fresh happiness for the royal family. The bride wore a fabulous embroidered gown, and the Queen lent her a royal heirloom.
There is a strong tradition for a bride to wear something borrowed on her wedding day. And for Princess Elizabeth's wedding, she was lent a fabulous diamond sunray fringe tiara that was originally set with diamonds in 1830. It's a Hanoverian tiara. And that was handed down to Queen Victoria and through the royal family. It's very bridal, it does frame the face beautifully and is a very fitting ornament to a wedding day.
The Queen knew that the family firm of us four must now include Philip. At 47, she knew she would never have a son of her own. Princess Elizabeth would succeed the king as monarch. Queen Mary knew that thanks to Bertie and Elizabeth, the monarchy was secure. In 1948, they celebrated their silver wedding anniversary. The king, only 53 and already suffering the early symptoms of his final illness, bravely made a speech.
It has been made the occasion of a worldwide expression of kindly goodwill towards us, which has greatly moved us. It has been an unforgettable experience to realize how many thousands of people there are in this world who wish to join in the thankfulness we feel for the 25 years of supremely happy married life which have been granted to us.
In November 1948, Princess Elizabeth gave birth to her first child, Prince Charles. Now a grandmother, Queen Elizabeth had a new and important role. She doted on the little boy. 2 years later, his sister, Princess Anne, was born. As this new era began, another was soon to end. On January the 31st, 1952, Princess Elizabeth flew to Kenya on behalf of her sick father. She would never see him again. The king died in his sleep at Sandringham just 6 days later.
This is London. It is with the greatest sorrow that we make the following announcement. It was announced from Sandringham at 10:45 today, February the 6th, 1952, that the king, who retired to rest last night in his usual health, passed peacefully away in his sleep earlier this morning.
Among those in the funeral procession was the Duke of Windsor, honouring the brother who had taken on the heavy burden of duty in his place. The Duchess was not invited. The Queen Mother, as Queen Elizabeth now became known, blamed the Duchess and most of all the Duke of Windsor for the king's early death.
I think she certainly believed that the Duke of Windsor, by his irresponsibility in abdicating and leaving the throne to George VI, had shortened her husband's life. She absolutely, seriously believed this. And there's a certain element of truth in it. Because of the strain he went through, particularly during the war, when he was informed by Churchill of exactly what was happening, I think this worry and the excessive smoking, this kind of thing, did shorten his life.
He was a tremendous warrior and borne down by the whole responsibility of being king. I'm absolutely sure it shortened his life. Yes, it was. For a man of his nature, who had the stammer, who was very shy, it was a tremendous responsibility. And although she did absolutely everything to ease his path, I'm absolutely sure that being king shortened his life. And she knew this, I think, always bore a grudge against the then Duke and Duchess of Windsor because they had shortened the life of her husband.
On June the 2nd, 1953, the world witnessed her eldest daughter crowned Queen Elizabeth II. It was the first televised coronation. The Queen Mother guided her 4-year-old grandson Charles throughout the long service. Much was expected of the young Queen, only 26 at her coronation. She would need the experience and support of her mother. Family unity, so much on display that day, would soon be tested. By the time of the 1947 voyage to South Africa, Princess Margaret was falling in love with her father's equerry, Group Captain Peter Townsend, a married man. After the King's death, Townsend divorced his wife. Working for the Queen Mother at her new home, Clarence House, he was now closely involved with Margaret.
It all came as a great surprise to the royal family, really, because it had been, I mean, a secret love affair between Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend. And the Queen Mother really had no idea at the beginning that this was going on under her very nose, because they were all together there in Clarence House. He was the controller, the Queen Mother's controller in Clarence House. So it came as a complete surprise. And what the Queen Mother did, which she does on many occasions, is simply turn her back on the whole thing. She simply put it out of her mind.
The Queen Mother has always had her eye on history and has always wanted it to be known that she is above reproach. And to have involved herself in a scandal, which it was at that time, which was likely to bring down the royal family, or at least certainly severely damage the royal family if Margaret had married Townsend, I think she wanted to stay as clear from it as possible.
Princess Margaret was determined, really, to marry Peter Townsend at an early stage. She felt it just wasn't right for all sorts of reasons, and in the end, of course, they prevailed upon Princess Margaret, and she gave him up.
Her sister, the Queen, didn't put any pressure on her at all. Princess Margaret's actual own Christian faith, and I think sense of her royal position, were the factors that decided her. I don't think she wanted to become a housewife, and Townsend would never have had any money.
The Queen Mother was overjoyed when Margaret, then almost 30, fell in love with society photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones. Their engagement was announced in February 1960, and the wedding took place on May the 6th. The bridegroom was created Earl of Snowdon. They had 2 children, David and Sarah, but the Snowdons would divorce 18 years later. However, the Queen Mother retained her affection for her son-in-law.
The Queen Mother always adored him, and because he was fun, because he was artistic. She likes people with taste, and so much did she like him that when things were going badly, and I think after they were even divorced, Princess Margaret used to get quite cross because her mother went on entertaining Anthony Armstrong Jones as though nothing had happened.
The Duke and Duchess of Windsor often travelled to New York, but they made their permanent home in Paris. Here they entertained on a grand scale. They sold their memoirs and were sometimes interviewed. The Duchess never forgot her husband's royal status.
I remember coming back from China. It was after the prince's trip to America. And there was a song then saying, I knew a girl who danced with the Prince of Wales.
He died in May 1972, aged 77. In death, he returned to the royal family. He was buried in royal ground at Frogmore near Windsor Castle, according to his wishes. But nothing could reverse the fact that he had been estranged from his family. Only 18 months had separated him in age from his younger brother, but he outlived Bertie by 20 years. Some blame the Queen Mother for the long rift between the royal brothers.
I think she certainly had a certain amount of influence in keeping the Duke of Windsor out of England. She mistakenly believed that he was still, would attract people and would make her husband less popular than he was, in comparison seemingly dull and this sort of thing. I think she miscalculated.
Prince Charles was the Queen Mother's favourite, although she adored all 6 of her grandchildren. He became the son she never had. It was to her that he always turned for love and affection, particularly when he was sent away to boarding school in Scotland.
He was at school at Gordonston, which he detested. He was terribly lonely, he was bullied, he was absolutely miserable. And he would go and stay with her at Burke Hall, and she would encourage him and encourage his taste in music and generally cherish him. And I think she saw in him the same sort of vulnerability that her husband had had, and they were very close.
He was a great favourite with her, and I think she encouraged him in many ways that his parents didn't. They were rather conventional. The Queen and Prince Philip had very conventional tastes on what young men should be. The Queen Mother appreciated his softer, more artistic side, and I think she certainly encouraged him as a young man.
Many of Charles's attitudes and interests spring from his grandmother. She even approved his choice of bride. She knew Lady Diana Spencer through her family's aristocratic connections. Diana had grown up in her father's care, but no one knew how much her parents' divorce had affected her. Diana's mother had lost custody of her children through the testimony of her own mother, Lady Fermoy, a longtime friend and lady-in-waiting to the Queen Mother. Any misgivings which she may have had about her granddaughter's suitability as a bride for Prince Charles were kept to herself. Duty to the royal family meant more than anything else to Lady Ruth Fermoy. The marriage was quietly promoted by the Queen Mother.
I do know that the Queen Mother said to Prince Charles, well, you know, you're not to mess her about. And if you don't grab her, somebody else will, because she's so attractive. She certainly said that. But I rather was told, but again, how far you can believe people, that, that Lady Fermoy really didn't think it was a good idea. But there again, you see, you have to understand how courtiers are. They don't tell the boss anything the boss might not want to hear. So, however much she may have said afterwards, oh God, I don't think she went along and said to the royal family, listen, I'm not sure this is going to be a good idea. I'm sure she didn't.
True to form, Ruth Fermoy supported Charles against Diana. The Queen Mother's presence at Lady Fermoy's funeral in 1993 was the final honour for the courtier who had put royalty before her own family, but had let down both her daughter and granddaughter. Perhaps influenced by Lady Fermoy, the Queen Mother came to see Diana as frivolous with little sense of duty. Diana considered the Queen Mother as a source of negative comment.
I don't think that there was much of a relationship there between the Queen Mother and the Princess of Wales. And of course, as things started to go wrong, the Queen Mother was ferociously loyal to Charles, always took his side.
Diana and the Queen Mother often had to meet in public. On these occasions, they had to hide the suspicion and growing coolness between them.
Diana decided to do her own thing. The Queen Mother could never really work out how Diana could do it and get away with it. And of course, the more Diana did and the more Diana got away with it, the bigger the breach between the two of them. And it was never going to be resolved, and in the end, it's my belief that Diana absolutely hated the Queen Mother. Perhaps unfairly, perhaps unfortunately, but it's true that that was the case.
Balmoral was used to conceal Charles's affair with another woman. At Burke Hall, the Queen Mother's house on the Scottish royal estate, he frequently met Camilla Parker Bowles.
The Queen Mother had a number of close friends, most of them courtiers, but occasionally people who were outside the royal court. And possibly the closest of all those was Derek Parker Bowles, whose son Andrew finally married Camilla Parker Bowles. And I think that the Queen Mother, from the outset, because of her close friendship with that family, saw that one of us was having a relationship with the Prince of Wales. When it came down to it, when Prince Charles needed somewhere to go with Camilla, Burke Hall, the Queen Mother's house at Balmoral, was made available, always with her knowledge, because Prince Charles is a dutiful grandson. He knows everything about keeping in touch with the Queen Mother, letting her know what's going on, and has always dedicated himself to that idea. And in return, the Queen Mother, rather enjoying the secret nature of this relationship between Charles and the adulteress, Mrs. Parker Bowles, was quite prepared to smile on it and lend her house to them.
Princess Margaret has a different relationship with her mother than the Queen. As the more difficult daughter, Margaret has often needed her mother with her constant example of gaiety and social ease. No event has ever challenged the Queen Mother, not even meeting the Beatles, for whom she wore her finest jewels.
Queen Mother's principal trademark is her love of pearls. She was a 1920s bride. She was brought up in that era when pearls were the most important accessory for a young girl and for any ladies of style and society. And she's remained true to that wonderful formal and traditional look. She still wears the most exquisite strands of pearls.
The Queen Mother is an expert at image and presentation. No appearance is achieved without considerable attention to detail by her designers.
Touching here, something wrong with the shoulder line. Here, the neckline, and then the fitter will suggest, perhaps, Mum, if we alter that, we make the neckline a little higher, would you feel? Yes, I think that would be very nice. And touching the hat here, it's got to come up. And we all the little bits and pieces and the little band that goes underneath, you don't get complaints, but you know that if it isn't, you just keep on doing it until it's right.
The Queen Mother's father, the Earl of Strathmore, inherited £250,000. He was a multi-millionaire by today's standards. Once a rich woman with a royal fortune, she is now reported to be heavily in debt.
Well, she's inherited some money from her father, but much more so from her husband, King George VI, who died back in 1952. And at that time, the Queen Mother was considered a very wealthy woman in her own right. But since then, her lifestyle has been very, very extravagant, and that's really, it seems, eaten into her fortune. 5 years ago, the Queen Mother put £19 million in trust for mostly her great-grandchildren, and a good deal of that is to go to Princes William and Harry in 2 instalments, 4.9 million when they're 21 and another 8 million to be shared between them when they're 40. So the reason why she may not have a lot of money today is because it's being shunted to one side to avoid inheritance tax.
Every year, the Queen Mother would leave her private Scottish home to greet the family on their way to Balmoral. They all adore her, but have not been able to control her massive spending.
I do think that the royal family, who have to pick up the bills after all for the Queen Mother, do slightly worry that she keeps on the central heating at her house, the Castle of May in the north of Scotland, all year round. And she only visits it from time to time, but in order to be able to make sure that the woodwork doesn't contract or that nasty damp stains appear anywhere, she will keep that central heating on. The bills are colossal.
The Queen Mother has often spent her birthday here at Clarence House, one of her 4 residences, each lavishly furnished and expensively maintained.
I think the Queen Mother is wonderfully extravagant. She's living in a different age. She is an Edwardian, and she lives in an Edwardian way. She has more servants than any other member of the royal family. She invites people to lunch at Clarence House and says, we'll have a little picnic. And you will go out on the lawns, and there will be an array of silver and gold and plate on the table. There will be footmen behind every chair, and you will be served the finest wines and champagne. And that to her is a picnic.
While the Queen is frugal, her mother sees no reason to change her habits. At 99, life is for living.
The Queen Mother is always the life and soul of the party wherever she is. She just makes things go. She likes to have people playing the piano and singing, and when she's racing, her enthusiasm is always there. She's planned with her racing manager all the mating of her horses up to the year 2003, so I think she intends to be around for a while yet.
This is her life and her century.
In 1981, the demure nursery school assistant blossomed into a radiant beauty, became the most photographed woman in the world. But she used that fame to lighten the burden of others and was loved by millions of people who never met her. She personified the humanity and hopes of a generation, and in death, she became known as the People's Princess. Diana was born into an immensely grand and long-established family with a stately home and extensive acres in Northamptonshire and strong royal connections. Her father was Viscount Althorpe, who later assumed the family title and became the 8th Earl Spencer. Born on the 1st of July 1961, Lady Diana Spencer was brought up at Park House, a residence on the Queen's estate at Sandringham. Her childhood there was idyllic. Her parents had married in 1954. As a little girl, she loved to study these pictures, but the marriage did not last. Her mother walked out on the family when Diana was 6 years old, and she was heartbroken by her mother's defection. It left a deep and lasting scar.
Good morning, everyone.
She was packed off to boarding school and was seriously homesick. She did not excel in class, but compensated for a poor academic performance with her swimming. She won several prizes. She also developed a love of tap dancing and ballet, but grew too tall to contemplate a professional career.
Diana had been very affected by her parents' separation. Her father remarried a woman that none of them, particularly Diana, liked. So it was a very unhappy child in their respect.
She was being tugged back and forth, and well, her two elder sisters were at boarding school, and her brother was so young that a lot of it washed over his head. This did not happen with Diana. Diana was young enough to be at home and old enough to absorb all of the destructive lessons.
After a brief spell at a Swiss finishing school, Diana moved to London and shared a flat with 3 girlfriends. She adored children and secured a job as a nursery school assistant.
I wanted to teach children, and they said, why not come along? So I first started off doing afternoons, and then I took over the mornings and did whole days. But I only worked 3 days a week at kindergarten, and the other 2 I looked after an American baby boy, which nobody seems to realise. It was very special to me.
Diana was like many a young girl about town. She loved fashion and small supper parties. There were no boyfriends and no talk of romance. She led a simple, carefree existence. But that was about to change. A couple of years earlier, she had met Prince Charles, one of the world's most eligible bachelors. Charles's grandmother, the Queen Mother, believed the shy and innocent Lady Diana would make an ideal bride for the future King of England, and she fostered their relationship. In London, Diana was besieged by photographers and reporters as rumours of a royal romance circulated.
How well are you coping with all the press attention?
Well, as you can see, you can tell.
Are you bearing up with it quite well, though? Because it must be quite a strain with all of us after you.
Well, it is, naturally.
You're coping with it all right, though? You seem to be doing very well.
Well, I'm still around.
The rumours grew in strength, and the press became more persistent. For Diana, it was a foretaste of things to come.
Is there any possibility of any announcement of your marriage in the near future? Can you tell me? Can you tell me if there's any possibility?
I'm not going to say anything, I'm afraid.
Right, but Prince Charles did give us a hint himself. He said we wouldn't have to wait too long.
And they didn't. The engagement between Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer was announced in February 1981, and the bride-to-be faced her first formal photo call.
The first photograph you've actually had with us together.
She was the most beautiful girl I'd ever photographed, and she just glowed. And when she smiled, lit up the picture. You knew you had a wonderful picture. And when she looked down your lens and those eyes always made up properly, always beautiful. Just They were just sensational pictures. You just couldn't afford to miss anything she did.
Good. Into this lane, please. More. There. More, honey.
What do you think we got in common?
Sense of humour. Every outdoor activity, except I don't ride.
So remember did that.
Lots of things, really.
What about you, sir? No, I think certainly, I mean, all sorts of things. Certainly a sort of love of the outdoors, and she's a very energetic character as well, which is very encouraging. And music and interests like that, and skiing.
Can you find the words to sum up how you feel today, both of you?
Difficult to find the right sort of word, isn't it, really? Just delighted and happy. And I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Yes.
Well, it
you
obviously
can put your
means,
own interpretation.
Obviously means two very happy people.
Yes.
Once again, congratulations.
Well, from us, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
It's very kind.
It was a very revealing moment, I think, the engagement interview, when they were asked, quite rightly, if they were in love. She said, of course, which is interesting looking back at her instinct of public relations, which we've seen since was already functioning then at a very young age. Charles, in his ponderous way, said, whatever love is. That now seems very significant, because I don't think he ever was in love with her. I think he entered into this marriage in an entirely cynical frame of mind. We now know that he had this mistress, Mrs. Parker Bowles, who he'd already had an affair with, continued during the marriage. When Prince Charles started to take an interest in her, I think she genuinely did fall in love with him, as what 17-year-old wouldn't if the 30-year-old future King of England threw himself at your feet. I think any girl would have fallen in love with the idea of Charles, the idea of his future, the idea of their future together, whatever he himself was actually like. And there were many aspects of him that were very appealing. He promised her a happy family life.
As far as the public was concerned, it was a match made in heaven. And on the 29th of July 1981, the stage was set for the wedding of the century at St. Paul's Cathedral in London.
Prince Charles, before the wedding, could have been involved with three separate women. Amanda Knatchbull, the granddaughter of Earl Mountbatten, Anna Wallis, the daughter of a Scottish landowner, and the Princess of Wales, Lady Diana Spencer. And each one of those could have been a royal bride. And he, in his public pronouncement, said that he wasn't looking for somebody to be in love with, but he was looking for a companion, a friend who would and really be able to help him in a very difficult job.
It was a fairy story, because the whole thing up to the wedding, you know, that she was so innocent, so young, and kind of, you know, not used to all this glitz and glamour and stuff, and then suddenly, you know, she was going to marry this good-looking prince, and it was just fantastic. I'm going to get goosebumps just thinking about it. It was the most incredible time for all of us.
Diana's Emmanuel designed dress brought gasps of admiration. It symbolized everything about a royal match that had captivated the world.
It's just like designing for any other bride, except that you had to keep in the back of your mind the fact that there's, I don't know how many billions of people were going to be watching. And, you know, they could see the nerves and everything, and it was those imperfections that showed that she is a human being, that she was living a fairy story.
Diana was the first English woman to marry an heir to the throne for over 300 years. She was just 19 years old, an English rose, and the royal family rejoiced.
I, Diana Frances,
I, Diana Frances,
take thee, Charles Philip Arthur George,
take thee, Philip Charles Arthur George,
to my wedded husband,
to my wedded husband,
to have and to hold,
to have and to hold,
from this day forward, according to God's holy law, and thereto I give thee my troth. Here is the stuff of which fairy tales are made. The prince and princess on their wedding day.
Across the globe, 1,000 million people tuned into the royal wedding. In the course of the day, the shy nursery school assistant was catapulted to the status of international superstar. The newlyweds began their honeymoon in Gibraltar before cruising the Mediterranean on the royal yacht Britannia. But all was not well. Diana suffered a recurrence of bulimia, the eating disorder.
Bulimia is something she'd had in her teens before she got married, but the consensus, I think, is that it's one of those things that if the person is happy and fulfilled, then it goes away. And it's always got the potential to come back if that person's life goes wrong for any reason. It was after Diana had, for instance, on their honeymoon, discovered photographs of Camilla fluttering out of Charles's diary, Charles wearing cufflinks that Camilla had given him in the early weeks of their marriage. What kind of a start is that to a marriage? And it's not surprising that the bulimia quite swiftly came back.
In reality, the royal couple were emotionally and intellectually incompatible. There was a 12-year age gap, and their interests differed widely. But on their return from the honeymoon, Diana gave no hint of her waning romantic illusions.
Madam, how are you enjoying married life?
Highly recommend.
How do you like Balmoral as a place?
I think Diana, in many ways, was probably quite a difficult girl to be married to. But let's not forget, A, that she was very young, B, that she got no help at all in this extraordinary change of life.
On the surface, at least, the early days of Diana's marriage appeared happy and contented. The royal couple's first official tour was to the Principality of Wales. Shy Di was an instant hit. She had an easy and open manner, and the crowds loved it. The young princess made her first faltering attempt at speech-making, which she always found difficult.
I am extremely grateful to you, Lord Mayor, and to the City Council, and to the City of Cardiff, for granting me the freedom of the city. I realise it is a very great honour, and I am most grateful. I would like to try to express my thanks to you in Welsh, also. Mae'n blesor cael dod e Gymru, hoffwn ddod eto yn fuan. Diolch yn fawr.
But Diana was struggling to come to terms with the restrictions of court life. Haunted by the rapidly unraveling relationship with her husband, the picture postcard princess felt isolated and increasingly desperate. The birth of Prince William in June 1982, 11 months after the royal wedding, set the seal on what seemed a fairy tale marriage.
May we see your son, Your Royal Highness?
Will's arrival was a cause for celebration throughout the land. In reality, Diana suffered badly from pre- and postnatal depression and continuing bouts of bulimia that reduced her to a deeply disturbed state. She later confessed to attempts at self-mutilation. Nevertheless, the birth of a second in line to the throne gave both parents great joy and brought a new focus to Diana's life. She was determined that her young son would know the close love and attention she'd been starved of in her own childhood. In 1983, Diana accompanied her husband on their first overseas tour to Australia. But in a break with royal protocol, she insisted that baby came too. It was a populist stance that instantly endeared the young princess to an adoring Australian public.
Now for all of our students on here today, good morning, girls and boys.
They were bowled over by her openness and informality.
Does Prince William have a favourite toy?
Jamie, he loves his koala bear he's got. But he hasn't got anything particular. He just likes something with a bit of noise.
Plastic whale which throws things out the top.
He got a plastic whale that throws things out the top, little balls.
The newlyweds were perfectly in step and enchanted everyone around them. The royal match appeared flawless.
That was a real love trip every day, and they just used to hold hands, and he was very tactile, and he would always be touching her and making sure she was comfortable, and I remember he would reassure her, and he would hold her hand and smile at her and say, "You're doing a great job, darling," and that was the most wonderful, wonderful trip.
The rapturous reception was repeated a few weeks later in British Columbia, Canada. Everybody wanted to embrace the beautiful princess, and Di mania was born.
It's just so beautiful. I'm just so privileged. I can't believe I did that.
Ironically, it was her overwhelming popularity that placed a further strain on her relations with Charles.
I've come to the conclusion that really it would have been far easier to have had two wives. To have covered both sides of the street. And I could have walked down the middle, directing the operation.
He became jealous that she was more popular than him. If they arrived somewhere together and they went to separate sides of the crowd, the side that he went to would groan. Now, that would be difficult for any of us to handle, but he didn't handle that very well, and that, within the marriage, gave her a little bit more power, a little bit more self-confidence.
That growing self-confidence showed in every aspect of her life. The shy young girl who first stepped onto the public stage and into the glare of international publicity had little fashion sense. That changed rapidly.
She did look like a county girl. You could tell that she was sort of, trying to work out what the style was. She knew that there was a style. I think she had an idea that she wanted this glamorous image, which is what she was very good at and is what she portrayed.
She did look like a nursery school teacher. All the photographs of her in the billowing skirts and sort of slightly transparent and very innocent, and that's what she was like. And when she came into us, she was very much like that, and she was looking for a dress for her first big occasion out with Prince Charles, and I think it was at the Guildhall. And she saw a black dress hanging there, and she decided to wear that, and from that day on, I mean, she was a fashion icon.
David and Elizabeth Manning.
Hello.
Hello, good morning, ma'am.
The sketches were marvellous. Shall we just have you got lots of material in there?
Yeah. She'd say, look, I'm going on this tour and I'll need to be covered up, and, she'd tell us the restrictions that were imposed by the different cultures and things. And then we'd just get on with it, and we knew the colours that she liked and the looks by then. So we would just come up with, like, tons of drawings.
It's a difficult one, because I've got to hide my elbows, 3/4 length in hem, and a sort of cruel round neck.
So we would lay them all out on the floor, and she'd be down there on the floor with us, sorting through it all. And it was great, real collaboration.
So, I think we might avoid the spots.
Yeah, okay.
No spots.
I think she was aware, and of the importance of being seen, because people come along, they want to see the princess, and they expected her to stand out in a crowd. And so we use a lot of emerald greens and pinks, all those kind of colours, and they look great on her. She's got the right skin colour and hair, and she looked great.
I quite like what you've done there.
Just like a sort of...
You're a top knot?
Like a band. Yes, I'd
Yeah.
love to
Really?
wear that.
Really?
Could I do it with my mop?
Yes.
We could tempt it.
Well, that's easy. Well, we can do that.
Diana became intrigued by the world of high fashion and was a swift learner. She was rapidly developing her own sense of style. With her own natural good looks, she began to fulfill the fantasy role of princess as no other British royal had done before her.
She's very, very soon got out of that sort of little girl thing of the early 80s around the marriage. And, give her 5 years, given her 4 years, 5 years, she was looking like a sort of a Hollywood actress.
But the fashion-conscious Di was equally vigorous in undertaking enormous amounts of charity work. It became one of the central pillars of her life.
Will my hubby be down from Scotland then? Because I'd quite like to go with him.
Yes.
Will he be down or will it be on my
I don't
own?
think he will. I think he'll still be. He'll still be
Still
up in Scotland. Yes.
I think it's all right to go on my own, something like this. 'Cause it's quite a
think
big occasion.
It's a big occasion, but it is for your charity.
Is it going to be for birth?
No, Help the Aged. Help the Aged. You attended.
As if to fill the emotional void in her marriage, she played an increasingly important part in attracting publicity and money for uncomfortable causes such as leprosy, the homeless and the aged.
Working for Help the Aged as our patron, she did more to raise the profile of older people, both in the tragic circumstances, frailty and vulnerability, as well as in the joyous circumstances. She could celebrate older people's lives and loved to hear their stories.
We're always kneeling on things like this, wasn't there?
Yes, I'm just backing them. I didn't
What do you
actually.
actually stuff it with? What do you put
Well,
inside?
there's sort of. Show you this one. When we made a bag of notes, it was soft. Yes.
It's not leather tights going in there.
No.
People would come up to me beforehand and they say, oh, we've only got a couple of minutes to meet her. I really don't think that's enough. And, I think perhaps we ought to be meeting her for longer. And I always used to say, it's absolutely fine, because I knew what they didn't know, which was that at the end of the time they'd met her, they'd come back to me and say, she spoke to me for hours.
And were you in a motorbike accident?
It was a driving accident. Dived into water when I was too shallow.
So how long do they work you in here for in the morning? Long enough, I suppose.
Long enough, yeah.
Were you able to sleep in the afternoon?
She had that ability to make people feel included and to make other people the centre of attention. And actually that's a special gift, and not many people have it. And she had it in enormous abundance.
Fault of their own, obviously, so we're parents to them as well.
You're building extensions on your
we are.
All these people.
We're just as a happy family, I mean, I was one of 9, so we was used to sharing, we was used to sharing,
As a member of the British royal family, Princess Diana's daily duties encompassed almost every conceivable situation. Despite the many problems she faced in her personal life, she tackled each official engagement with grace and aplomb. Wherever she went, she seemed to light up the lives of those around her.
Who's that?
I thought you might ask that one.
Who's that? Who does she belong to? Yours.
She would bring, even to the most formal occasions, a sense of informality and fun. Everyone who met her spoke of that magic touch and her ability to affect the lives of ordinary people.
And then onto the parade ground. That takes about a minute. I won't actually
How many times have you practiced this?
Yeah, I'll fit a thing on it.
I think that's very good.
I think that's all right.
Yes, I think it's absolutely good.
You can't really say much else, can you? It's lovely, thank you very much. I'm proud.
By 1984, Diana was pregnant again. The royal couple enjoyed the happiest period of their married life. A short while later, on September the 15th, at St. Mary's Hospital in London, Prince Harry was born. But what should have been a joyous occasion for both Charles and Diana quickly turned sour.
After Prince Harry was born, she said to her friends, he looked at Harry, he expected to have a girl, he wanted a girl, and he said, oh, it's a boy, and it's got red hair. A red hair is a Spencer characteristic. So she says herself that something inside died on that day, on the day that Harry was born, and from that moment onwards, her staff, her friends, and all those around her could feel the chill surrounding Charles and Diana.
Diana was concerned that the sorry state of her marriage should not affect the lives of her sons. Memories of her own unhappy childhood reinforced her determination to become the best mother in the world. With typical tenacity, she made the young princes the center of her life.
Mine, can I lead him, please? Will you promise to walk slowly? That's much better. Nice and slowly. That's better for Harry. Good boy.
Her life was her son's. They meant really everything to her, and she had a very close relationship with them both. She really has guided them through so much and prepared William certainly for the role ahead of him. And I think he will miss her more than words can possibly say. She wanted them to be in touch. That for her was the most important thing, not to be isolated. I think the monarchy has been very isolated, and she lent it a very human side with all the work that she did. And she was always keen to impress on Prince William and Prince Harry how important that was to stay in touch. I think that would be the single message that both of them will remember from her, that and her extraordinary compassion for other people.
The royal couple were living a lie. Their marriage was on the rocks, but the royal roadshow had to go on. Once more, Australia.
We're off.
The marriage of the century of which dreams are made had become a tyranny of togetherness.
Good luck. He's in closer to the bench now, the length and a half, then Vidarar and Under Rosen there, followed by Black Knight. 300 to go, our boyfriend under the whip, a length and a half in front of Butternut and Coiro Corrie.
Only the closest insiders could have detected the fragile state of Diana and Charles's marriage. But for the royal couple, it was not all fun at the races. Overseas tours were long and arduous, and made more difficult by a strained relationship and schedules that didn't always go according to plan.
Change your birthday.
Well, there's a problem with the runway. It's hardly usual.
Not possible.
What do you mean later?
No, they
Later
tell
what?
us.
That we may have to drive to Miami and take off from there. So
Which is a mere 5 hours drive, wasn't
no,
it?
it's not.
Six.
45 minutes. About 45 minutes.
So that we'll get back to Brighton by midnight.
I think it might just tip us over to midnight.
That's all right, because it's 6 o'clock our time, isn't it? Body time.
Oh, that's a
Sorry.
good way of looking at it.
Still be drinks time for you.
I'm working on it.
Right.
So no press now, just official photographers for this recording.
Hello, my name Tom.
10 to 8, 10 to 8. Yes.
Their first visit to the United States followed, where a curious press corps mustered in force to report on a presidential welcome for the royal couple. For Diana, it was a widening of her horizons, a portent of things to come. In later years, it was America that responded most enthusiastically to the charismatic English princess with the film star looks.
She's so thin, it's disgusting. She's beautiful. She's great. She's beautiful. She's great.
Back in England, Diana extended her patronage to an ever-widening circle of groups and causes. She passionately wanted to do good and possessed an instinct for human relations, the true touch of a princess, which was unequalled.
Because the gala was wonderful. Adored that.
You enjoyed it, didn't
I had a cold, much to Harold's horror. Every time there was a quiet moment, what's going on? I loved it.
You didn't look it. It doesn't show in your eyes
No,
when you have it.
no,
I
it's
mean,
just the
yeah.
makeup.
No, but some people's eyes go dull.
You must have felt rotten though, having to sit through it
No, it's all right now. I just get embarrassed. And you know when you're not supposed to cough, you cough more.
Of course, you can't control it.
And the backless dress, of
The
course.
backless dress is amazing, yeah. Yes. Didn't think I had the pearls down the back that night.
No, you
didn't.
I learnt that. I was very uncomfortable when I wore that.
When you
stabbed in the back.
Swing and then
Although Charles and Diana now only came together on official occasions, they still maintained the facade of a rock-solid marriage. This was the young Prince Harry's first day at school. Divorce seemed out of the question, as it would mean the destruction of everything the royal family stood for. Meanwhile, they both looked elsewhere for the affection and support that they had failed to give each other. For Charles, it meant a return to Camilla Parker Bowles, the love of his life.
I think there were a few years while the children were being born when he kept her at a distance, but the friendship remained, and the friendship always had the capacity to become sexual again, which I think it did long before the marriage had irretrievably broken down. The marriage broke down because of his relationship with Mrs. Parker Bowles. And if Diana had 2 or 3 lovers after the irretrievable breakdown of the marriage, so what? Psychologically, I think men and women will understand that Diana, the world's most famous, the world's most attractive woman, deserved to fall into 1 or 2 subsequent arms to have the happy family life she's always wanted and always been denied.
In February 1992, evidence of the strange in their marriage became public when Diana spurned Charles's attempt to kiss her at the end of a polo match. A 6-day official tour of India became a tale of 2 tours, with Charles and Diana going their separate ways.
Prince Charles went to the Taj Mahal some 10 years before the visit towards the end of the marriage. It is one of the world's most romantic places. When they did go to India together, he didn't take her. He chose to stay behind in Delhi.
A wiser prince than I would have opted for a visit to the Taj Mahal and the Red Fort at Agra, which I believe is where some, at least,
of the greatest pundits of the press think I ought to be anyway.
She famously now posed for a photograph alone, therefore looking very solitary, and it became the main one of what we call a series of postcards home, another one at the pyramids in Egypt, where she was sending clever signals to the world that she was very alone in this marriage.
It was this bombshell book that finally blew the lid off the royal marriage. In June 1992, Andrew Morton's Diana, Her True Story was published with the princess's tacit consent. It claimed that she was trapped in a loveless marriage and was desperately unhappy. Despite the book's claims that Charles was a distant father, uncaring husband, and adulterer, the couple embarked on a disastrous state visit to Korea a few months after publication. Diana denied any involvement with the book, and no statements were forthcoming from Buckingham Palace.
In the absence of any official statements or other information or interviews, body language becomes immensely important. And it was the body language of that trip, the Korea trip, that showed that this marriage had broken down. And Diana's antennae, I think, were much more alert to this body language. Again, you can call it media manipulation if you want to, but awareness of the media, than Charles, who just gritted his teeth and got through it.
Diana returned from the Korean fiasco alone, and speculation was rife. The British public, who'd expected so much of Charles and Diana in 1981, were left confused and perplexed. A further bombshell awaited them.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected. This decision has been reached amicably, and they will both continue to participate fully in the upbringing of their children, while continuing to give a wholehearted commitment to their public duties.
Your patron has never been happier to see you. Whatever uncertainties the last few weeks may have brought, I want you to be certain of this: our work together will continue unchanged, especially now as Christmas brings its own painful stresses to so many people in need. The sick, the old, the handicapped and the homeless, the lonely, the confused, and the simply unloved, who are needing your help more than ever.
A new era opened in Diana's life. She now threw herself, body and soul, into charity work, using her personal magnetism to draw support for some of the most difficult causes.
When you look through Diana's life, you see that she's always been slightly rebellious. Her work for AIDS was very much against the royal rules. I mean, they tend to stick to very traditional charities. And the very fact that she was prepared to cuddle AIDS victims, shake their hands without gloves, helped to break down much of the mythology surrounding AIDS. And in that respect, I think she did an enormous amount, not just in Britain, but around the world, to help to break down those taboos.
She had the common touch. It's no secret that we used to go to a hospice and people would stay alive knowing she was going to come, and they wanted to see her so much they would carry on living because this woman just had the touch. She would sit on the beds of the patients and hold their hands. I remember in Brazil once, you know, she cuddled these AIDS babies when AIDS was a real dirty word, you know, but Diana almost single-handedly took the stigma out of AIDS.
HIV does not make people dangerous to know, so you can shake their hands and give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it.
She had a complicated personality. Who doesn't? But just this, you know, this underlying enormous compassion and capacity to give and to respond to people who were suffering on exactly their level. She understood about suffering. She'd suffered so much herself that she was able to, it was really a language, an emotional language that she understood.
She became aware not just of her ability to be the fairy on the Christmas tree, but to be a woman who could bring attention to subjects that were neglected. And not only subjects that were neglected, but subjects in which she herself got a real buzz out of being involved. She started with the glitz and then went to the things that were far less glamorous, which gave her more satisfaction.
I think we ought to retire gracefully.
Armed with nothing more potent than a smile and a kindly word, she reached out to others with her personal gospel of giving and caring.
When she had returned from various engagements, often she would cry. She was completely depleted by what she had done. And I think very often what the public saw was this extraordinary woman going about her job. And I think very often they thought it was easy, but it was not easy for her. It absolutely drained her. She had an extraordinary life force. She was a very magnetic person, and she harnessed that to good use.
Two things stand like stone: kindness in another's trouble, courage in your own.
At home, Diana brought one of her own long-standing problems to center stage, her battle with bulimia.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have it on very good authority that the quest for perfection our society demands can leave the individual gasping for breath at every turn. This pressure inevitably extends into the way we look. Eating disorders, whether it be anorexia or bulimia, show how an individual can turn the nourishment of the body into a painful attack on themselves.
Diana's body and face were her power, but her curse too. She had become a fashion icon and the most photographed woman in the world. But the constant scrutiny of her clothes and appearance made her a prisoner of her own celebrity. She developed a love-hate relationship with the press. It became an ever-present and increasingly complicated part of her life. She became astute at manipulating the media to make a point. On the day that Charles confessed to having an affair with Camilla Parker Bowles, she stole the headlines by wearing that now famous revealing black dress.
I think she understood the newspaper photographers that were there covering her as an assignment. She used to get pretty upset with some of the paparazzi who were there just to make her get angry, see her not looking at her best, to get as much money for their photographs as they could. And for them, she ended up despising them.
The press pried into her private life to an alarming degree. There were so-called secretly recorded tapes everywhere. First, Diana-gate, allegedly a conversation between Diana and a male companion. Then Camilla-gate, allegedly between Charles and his lover. Then the Highgrove tapes, supposedly of arguments between the prince and the princess at their country home. The final straw came when a newspaper published pictures of the princess working out in a gym. It led Diana to speak out about the intolerable pressure she was living under.
When I started my public life 12 years ago, I understood the media might be interested in what I did. I realized then their attention would inevitably focus on both our private and public lives. But I was not aware of how overwhelming that attention would become, nor the extent to which it would affect both my public duties and my personal life in a manner that's been hard to bear. My first priority will continue to be our children, William and Harry, who deserve as much love and care and attention as I am able to give, as well as an appreciation of the tradition into which they were born.
Diana lavished love and affection on William and Harry and was determined that they should live as normal a life as possible. Her happiest days were with her boys. The divorce from Charles became official in August 1996.
I think the big mistake was removing her title at the divorce. Not that she minded about that sort of thing. She never stood on ceremony. That wasn't her way at all, as anybody who's worked with her and seen her going about her work would vouch for. But I don't think what she didn't anticipate is that when it was removed, there was a barrier. It was an invisible barrier that protected her. And then when that was removed, she was suddenly very vulnerable.
But even though Diana was no longer a royal highness, the press continued to track her every move. There was no escape. After her divorce, Diana made a symbolic break with the past. She sold 79 of her designer dresses at a charity auction in New York. It was typical of the Queen of Hearts that she chose to make a new start by raising money for people less fortunate than herself. The auction raised a staggering £2 million. The new Diana was not afraid to involve herself with political issues. Her heartfelt but controversial campaign to outlaw landmines gave her a new sense of purpose and fulfillment.
Charlie, who's behind you, is going to come in here, place the charge next to the mine.
Charlie.
But the search for personal peace was harder to achieve. She needed the press to publicize her causes.
1, 2, 3, firing.
But that media attention came at a price.
Hey.
It made her very angry when she was trying to relax. And when all she wanted was time out, time to discuss, girl talk, basically. That's it. That's all she wanted, a bit of peace. And she was never, ever, ever allowed it.
In the final months of Diana's life, media attention reached epic proportions. There were rumors of a new romance, and the bounty hunters were out in force. The man in Diana's life was Playboy millionaire Dodi Al-Fayed. It seemed Diana might at last have found the true happiness that had eluded her for so long. But it was not to be. On August 31st, 1997, Diana and Dodie perished in the mangled wreckage of their car in a Paris underpass.
Le SAMU de Paris qui a effectué la réanimation initiale. À son arrivée à l'hôpital de la Pitié-Salpêtrière, elle présente...
When she arrived at the hospital, she was already suffering hemorrhaging in the thorax. Then she suffered a stroke. Her death was recorded at 4 o'clock in the morning.
The Prince of Wales flew to Paris to bring Diana's body home.
You know how difficult things were for her from time to time. I'm sure we can only guess at, but the people everywhere, not just here in Britain, everywhere, they kept faith with Princess Diana. They liked her, they loved her. They regarded her as one of the people. She was the people's princess. And that's how she will stay, how she will remain in our hearts and in our memories forever.
Trouble.
Charles.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sorry. William. William.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, hold on.
Thank you very much.
Since last Sunday's dreadful news, we have seen throughout Britain and around the world an overwhelming expression of sadness at Diana's death. We have all been trying in our different ways to cope. It is not easy to express a sense of loss, since the initial shock is often succeeded by a mixture of other feelings: disbelief, incomprehension, anger, and concern for those who remain. This is also an opportunity for me, on behalf of my family, and especially Prince Charles and William and Harry, to thank all of you who have brought flowers, sent messages, and paid your respects in so many ways to a remarkable person. I hope that tomorrow we can all, wherever we are, join in expressing our grief at Diana's loss and gratitude for her all too short life. It is a chance to show to the whole world the British nation united in grief and respect. She was an exceptional and gifted human being. In good times and bad, she never lost her capacity to smile and laugh, nor to inspire others with her warmth and kindness. I admired and respected her for her energy and commitment to others, and especially for her devotion to her two boys.
We are gathered here in Westminster Abbey to give thanks for the life of Diana, Princess of Wales, to commend her soul to Almighty God, and to seek his comfort for all who mourn. We particularly pray for God's restoring peace and loving presence with her children, the Princes William and Harry, and all her family. In her life, Diana profoundly influenced this nation and the world. Although a princess, she was someone for whom, from afar, we dared to feel affection, and by whom we were all intrigued. She kept company with kings and queens, with princes and presidents, but especially we remember her humane concerns and how she met individuals and made them feel significant. In her death, she commands the sympathy of millions. Whatever our beliefs and faith, let us with thanksgiving remember her life and enjoyment of it.
Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not love, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, and have not love, I am nothing. But the greatest of these is love.
Diana explained to me once that it was her innermost feelings of suffering that made it possible for her to connect with her constituency of the rejected. And here we come to another truth about her. For all the status, the glamour, the applause, Diana remained throughout a very insecure person at heart, almost childlike in her desire to do good for others so she could release herself from deep feelings of unworthiness, of which her eating disorders were merely a symptom. The world sensed this part of her character and cherished her for her vulnerability, whilst admiring her for her honesty. There is no doubt that she was looking for a new direction in her life at this time. She talked endlessly of getting away from England, mainly because of the treatment that she received at the hands of the newspapers. I don't think she ever understood why her genuinely good intentions were sneered at by the media, why there appeared to be a permanent quest on their behalf to bring her down. It is baffling. My own and only explanation is that genuine goodness is threatening to those at the opposite end of the moral spectrum. It is a point to remember that of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this: a girl given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting was, in the end, the most hunted person of the modern age. I would like to end by thanking God for the small mercies he's shown us at this dreadful time, for taking Diana at her most beautiful and radiant, and when she had joy in her private life. Above all, we give thanks for the life of a woman I'm so proud to be able to call my sister, the unique, the complex, the extraordinary and irreplaceable Diana, whose beauty, both internal and external, will never be extinguished from our minds.
We give thanks to God for Diana, Princess of Wales,
for her sense of joy, and for the way she gave so much to so many people. Lord, we thank you for Diana, whose life touched us all, and for all those memories of her that we treasure. We give thanks for those qualities and strength that endeared her to us, for her vulnerability, for her radiant and vibrant personality, for her ability to communicate warmth and compassion, for her ringing laugh, and above all, for her readiness to identify with those less fortunate in our nation and the world. Lord of the loving, hear our prayer. We pray for those most closely affected by her death, for Prince William and Prince Harry, who mourn the passing of their dearly loved mother. The Princess will be especially missed by the many charities with which she identified herself. We recall those precious images, the affectionate cuddle of children in hospital, that touch of the young man dying of AIDS, her compassion for those maimed through the evil of landmines, and many, many, many more. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Let us commend our sister Diana to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer. Diana, our companion in faith and sister in Christ, we entrust you to God. Amen.
For some, the Queen Mother is an enduring symbol of regal grace and feminine charm. Others, like Princess Diana, detected a more forceful character.
I think Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, is the original English steel magnolia. Perhaps we could translate it out of Southern States American. She's an English rose inside a steel spectacle case. You don't live until you're 99, unless you're tough.
I think she's got a core of steel. I think that she is a woman who is very conscious of what she's able to do. She is very feminine in some ways. She is almost a flirt, almost a tease, and I think she's been that all her life.
As Duchess of York, Queen Consort and Queen Mother, the former Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon has spent most of her adult life in royal duty. Ever gracious and always smiling, she's created a unique rapport with the public. Despite being as old as the century, she has refused to retire. What is the secret of her vivacity?
She actually enjoys life. She takes huge pleasure in relatively little things. She loves horse racing. She loves gardens. She obviously loves clothes. She's not unfashionable. She's not old-fashioned. She transcends fashion. Like another Queen Elizabeth, the greatest, the first. She's got a motto. The motto of Queen Elizabeth I was, if I dare use Latin, semper et adem, always the same. And I think, really, it could be the motto of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother.
When Elizabeth was born in 1900, Queen Victoria was the reigning monarch. The Queen died the following year. Edward VII took the throne with his beautiful Queen Alexandra. In 1910, their son became King George V. He was king during World War I. He changed the royal family's Germanic name, Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, to the House of Windsor. St Paul's, Waldenbury, was one of several houses of the Earl and Countess of Strathmore, the Bowes-Lyon family. It was the earliest home of their 9th child, Elizabeth Angela Marguerite. Their first daughter had died, and their new little girl, with her appealing looks and gentle manner, was especially adored.
She was very close to her mother, and I think perhaps she was a bit spoiled because she was a very charming child, and all the servants adored her. She used to go into the kitchen and beg for extra jellies and cream and things like that. I think because of her great charm, she could get away with anything.
Glamis Castle in Scotland, with its secret rooms and ancient ghosts, was another Strathmore home. Every summer, Elizabeth's family gathered here, holding shooting parties. They had afternoon tea in the Great Hall, a treat for Elizabeth and her younger brother David.
The Bowes-Lyons were a very old family, going back to God knows whom in Scotland, and they were also very rich. They'd come into money rather fortunately, as well as having a lot of land. And they owned several castles, a huge house in St James's Square in London.
Interestingly enough, they weren't terribly impressed by the royal family. Her father didn't really think much of the royal family. So at the time that there were thoughts that she might marry into the royal family, he wasn't especially impressed by that because they were really aristocrats in their own right and had come down. They were descended from King Bruce of the Scots and so on. So really very, very grand family.
World War I broke out in August 1914 on Elizabeth's 14th birthday. She helped to nurse wounded soldiers sent to recover at Glamis. Later, she wrote to one of them, "Dear Harding, thank you so much for your letter. I am sorry that you can't find a job. It seems to be very difficult now." Elizabeth became one of the most eligible girls of her time.
She was very petite and small, and she had a pretty heart-shaped face, and beautiful blue eyes, and a lovely complexion, and dark hair, which she wore in a rather old-fashioned way for those days with a fringe. But she had this sort of radiant attraction. She had this great power even then of making people feel that she was concentrating on them, that she was only interested in them, which is one of the most attractive qualities you can have.
King King George V and Queen Mary were enchanted by Elizabeth. Their own children had been strictly brought up, creating personality problems. Bertie, their second son, was very shy. David, the Prince of Wales, was more rebellious. He met Elizabeth and liked her, but they never fell in love. Even then, he preferred more sophisticated women. It was Bertie who fell for Elizabeth's exceptional charms.
She was really the centre of masculine attention. A lot of men were in love with her. She was a great Deb in her day. When he met her, he fell in love with her absolutely instantly. And he was, with all his failings, because he was a very diffident, very shy, very reserved man, but he was always a very determined man. And once having fallen in love with her, he was determined to marry her. So he asked her 3 times, and for the first 2 occasions she refused. She didn't really want to be caught in this kind of royal cage. She was a woman who was used to her independence. She didn't really want to lead the restricted kind of life which marrying into the royal family would mean. But he was very persistent, the Duke of York, and he simply kept at her and kept at her and kept at her. And in the end, she agreed.
She really loved him. He had a very vulnerable quality, which is very appealing to some women. And he did really need her. And then he was physically attractive. He had a very good figure. He danced very well. He was very athletic. He dressed very well. And he was really a good guy.
On April the 26th, 1923, Elizabeth set out for her wedding at Westminster Abbey. It was the first royal wedding of the century. Elizabeth was now Her Royal Highness the Duchess of York. For over a decade, she would be the King and Queen's only daughter-in-law, adored by her husband and cherished by his family. The Yorks became the focus of public attention.
It was really a very popular marriage because the Prince of Wales, his brother, wasn't married at the time. So there was rather pressure really on the Duke of York to marry. So when they married, it was a great public occasion. The public were very taken with it because she was very, very beautiful. He was a good-looking man. It was a kind of romantic wedding and very, very popular.
The Duke and Duchess were the rising stars of the new House of Windsor. Elizabeth, known as the Smiling Duchess, was her husband's mainstay.
She was so good for Bertie. She brought him out, she supported him, she made his life fun, she made everything go around him. And I suppose they must have been a bit worried because he'd had a history of bad health, because he stammered and was very shy. And so nobody could have been more ideal than she was for him.
Queen Mary formed a close bond with her son's wife, now the mother of Princess Elizabeth, born on April the 21st, 1926. The Duchess gave birth to a second daughter, Princess Margaret Rose. In August 1930, the King and Queen were delighted with the little princesses. Marriage transformed Bertie's life. Most of all, Elizabeth gave him the stability of a happy home and a precious family.
In private, they say that he was a man who could be quite easy, quite amusing, quite at ease with himself in private. But in public, he had none of this. She was exactly the opposite. She had all the strengths where he had the weaknesses. And as she wasn't in any way a domineering woman, she wasn't in any way a hard woman, she knew exactly how to handle him. She knew exactly how to bring out his strengths. So they were very, very good together. It was a very, very successful marriage. He said many years later when Queen Elizabeth, when his daughter Elizabeth married Prince Philip, he said, "Your mother is the most wonderful woman in the world." And I think this is perfectly true. They were a devoted couple.
Bertie referred to his family as us four. Their main role was to support his aging parents in their duties, especially in the absence of the Prince of Wales, who had other interests.